That's a good lead-in to our next guest. Joe Bastardi is with us. Joe is formerly the chief long-range forecaster at AccuWeather, and as we mentioned, now chief forecaster for Weather Bell Analytics. You see him on a number of programs: Fox News Live, ABC World News, the O'Reilly Factor, the Colbert Report, if you will.
That was fun.
CBS, The Early Show, and a lot of those types of programs. We're glad he's here on AgriTalk. All right, Joe, let's get into global warming and greenhouse gas effects and climate change and the whole debate that's going on in this country. Is this man-made, or are we bringing this on ourselves?
Well, I don't believe so. I believe that if you, my talk here showed, that if you go back and look at the past and dig into the weather, and if you love the weather, and you're obsessed with looking at weather maps, and this came from my father's a meteorologist, degreed out of Texas A&M in '65, and always said that you have to go in and dig into details. You can see very clearly that we're in a similar cycle as the 1950s. As a matter of fact, in 2006, when I made that comment that we're going into a pattern that would favor more hurricanes up the eastern seaboard, drought and heat in the central plains in the summer, I got chastised roundly for it at that time, saying, as hyping things up and everything else. And it's really interesting to watch all this because the situation with the Pacific cooling, the tropical Pacific cooling now, you're literally turning down the thermostat in the ocean to the west of us, and when that happens, you don't have as much of a southern branch of the jet stream. There's not as much moisture coming into the west. It dries out coming over the Rockies. And as my presentation showed everybody, you can see the similarities as plain as the nose on my face. You also see why there are hurricanes up along the eastern seaboard. You got to understand something. Hurricanes are nature's way taking heat out of the tropics and redistribute it into the temperate regions. If you lower the production, the global activity is way down. If you lower the production in the Pacific, where you get the most global activity, you have to make it up someplace in the Atlantic. Now, people are yelling about Superstorm Sandy. It's Hurricane Sandy. That was a hurricane when it made landfall. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on, but you don't have that kind of storm coming out of the east with that kind of barometric pressure and do those type of things unless it's tropical. All right, so you had that hurricane. You had Irene up the eastern seaboard. In 1954, 3 majors up the east coast. 1954, including 2 in 10 days, Carol and Edna. The 38 hurricane, had winds to 186 miles an hour, Blue Hill, Massachusetts. 5 minutes sustained at 121. 5 minutes. Blew down 2 billion trees in New England. All right. 50-foot wall of water across the Hamptons. 15 feet of water into Providence, Rhode Island. You see, if people don't know these things, then they think that whatever happened to them is the worst thing that's ever happened.
Or the first time it's ever happened.
Do you remember getting punched when you were a kid? No, probably not. But if you got punched today, you'd remember, oh, that was the worst shot at, I'm Italian. We talk like that.
Well, let me ask you this, because, we've had people say, well, cattle out there, all those cow pies out there, those cow patties in the field, that's what's the methane, that's what's causing a global warming, and they want to penalize and regulate agriculture closer because of it.
First of all, greenhouse gas to me is a misnomer, because when we look at a greenhouse, it's a solid pane that traps heat. That's not what goes on in the atmosphere. We have a blanket of gases that's most dense near the surface of the earth. The Creator, and I do believe in the Creator, designed it so that it adds 33 degrees Celsius to the Earth's temperature. If there were no greenhouse gases, it'd be 255 Kelvin. That's minus 18 C. It's tough to live where it's minus 18 degrees Celsius, all right? Believe me. There are not a lot of people living up at the North Pole. You ever notice more people live closer to the equator than they do the North Pole? I wonder why that's true. It's hard to grow food when it's 20 below zero. But the fact is that you get 33 degrees. People agree on that. And CO2, 0.4 to 0.7 of the greenhouse gases is from CO2. It is a necessary blanket. The number one greenhouse gas is water vapor. Now, you obviously can't regulate water vapor, though someone may try to do that. But it is in the control. The oceans and the sun are in control of the entire shooting match. CO2 can do some things, some small things. No one's going to say, well, it's absolutely has nothing to do with it if you're going to look at it that way. But compared to the cycles in the ocean, the cyclical cycles in the sun, and all the other things. The fact that you ever think that 3/4 of the Earth's land mass is in the northern hemisphere, more ocean in the southern hemisphere. Do any of you know that the southern hemisphere ice cap is at near record high levels? Does anybody tell you that? And that's remarkable. You know why? Because if you're surrounded by water, it takes more to cause the freezing process of salt water in a large scale area than it does when you're getting warm air coming off continents like you do the northern ice cap. The northern ice cap is surrounded by land. The southern ice cap is surrounded by ocean. As it is, the Atlantic Ocean's in its warm cycle. And when it's in its warm cycle, there's a lot of warm water that goes up there. And when it does that, it causes some melting of the ice cap. It will reverse over the coming years as the Atlantic flips back to its cold cycle. So if you don't know this, and someone says to you, it's got to be because your SUV is putting too much CO2 in the air. Do you know how much CO2 man puts in the air? The Department of Energy, not the Cato think tank or Joe Bastardi. The Department of Energy says that we contribute 5% to that 1/400th of the atmosphere that's CO2. Now, I want you to think about that, 5%. And when you look at the oceans having 1,000 times the heat capacity of the air, do the simple math. There is some, what happened was someone came after me about my physical arguments. I had a 3-minute presentation on Fox. I said, the guy doesn't know his physics. So I went in, made sure I dug in, and I understand how the CO2 molecule is supposed to re-radiate, or what they call back radiation, and heat all this thing up. But as I said before, if you go into your bathroom, turn on the shower, to warm, the bathroom heats up. It's not because you flicked on the light, it's because of the warmth of the water. It's the same thing with the oceans. And Dr. Bill Gray of Colorado State, who's a renowned hurricane expert, has become a friend of mine over the years. He predicted all of this back in the 70s, that the Atlantic would go into its warming cycle. We'd see more hurricanes, there'd be more drought. We'd go back into the 1950s, which is where all you are at. And so you have to look at the past to provide a foundation to go forward into the future. Look at known events. If someone tells you 100 years from now it's going to be burning up, he's not even around to verify the forecast. If I tell you in a month it's going to rain and it doesn't rain, you can fire me. That's what happens in my business.
Okay, real quick. We're in a, certainly compared to last year, a cold March. Is that going to continue this?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had. I put that up there at the beginning. Were you here for the?
Yes.
I don't know. Well, you saw that forecast went out on February 25th for a cold March. Most Marches in the 50s were cold, and why is that? Because when you have this kind of blocking that goes on in this situation, when you have what we call the cold PDO, warm AMO, it creates a lot of blocking over top of the pole. So like we said, the pole, it's a little bit warmer up there. In other words, if there's warmer air up there, what generally happens as the jet stream begins to weaken, you start seeing these puddles of cold air that develop over the United States. They love to develop over Europe, over the eastern part of Asia. Most of the Marches in the 1950s were cold. So this is something we're probably going to see for several years to come as we're in this cycle. But what happens is this, that warmth, as the jet stream continues to weaken, the sun gets higher in the sky, that warmth literally sinks back over North America, and you see North America become very warm for the summers in most cases. So it's something that we saw. I threw up a chart showing how the summers of 51 and 2009 looked almost perfectly alike, and then the 3 following summers were both very hot. So it's not the same, but it's similar. It's not the answer, but it's a hint at the answer, and constant look at details, and then using the modern technology. I don't believe that's voodoo, certainly, but using the modern technology, I think you can come up with a good answer and a better answer.
All we need you to do is come out of your shell a little bit and, get a little more enthusiastic.
I've been told I'm very shy about things.
I reserve. Let's give him a big round of applause. Joe
Thank you for having me.
Chief Forecaster for Weather Bell Analytics. And again, you see him on a lot of the network shows. Interesting thoughts. And, we keep getting pounded over the head about global warming and man-made causes and things like this. It's good to hear this perspective. All right.